So here we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's daily meditation webinar on self-expression. Today is August 3rd, 2015. It's in the heat of the summer now, and I hope everybody's having a good summer thus far. It feels like it's starting to flip by quickly, just like everything else does. So I just want to remind you about the rules of engagement, so to speak, that if ever you have a question for me, feel free to text it to me, and I'll read the text and I'll answer it out loud. The more interactive these conversations are, the more fun they seem to be, and the more lively they certainly are. So let's just start by looking at Sorry, I just did something goofy. Let's start by looking at the quote of the day. This is from Shakespeare, and I really love this quote. He says, "They say all lovers swear more performance than they are able, and yet reserve an ability that they never perform." So what does that mean? I read it again this morning, and I thought, all lovers swear more performance than they are able. So that means that in general, we all sort of brag about what we're capable of. And there are studies that show, too, that people put their best foot forward in the first 3 months that they're dating. So we put on our best behavior. We really want to wow the person that we're dating or that we're getting to know. And a lot of times it's not really even a conscious manipulation like, I'm going to act terrific, or I'm going to do what I can to manipulate this person. It's just sort of a natural inclination we have when we meet people, if we're polite or we're nice or trying to put our best foot forward. And yet it goes on to say we reserve an ability that we never perform. So that means for as much as we're swearing a performance, we're showing how good we are, we're putting on our best game face, in truth, there's a part of us that we will never, ever show to another. And so that's another one of those interesting paradoxes in life, I think, that in some ways we hide ourselves from our own selves, not just from our lovers or prospective partners or current partners. Does anybody have any thoughts about this? Well, if you do, go ahead and chime in. Nonverbal self-expression. There are, scholars who state that 65% of all of our communication is nonverbal. So that means through body language, facial expression, certainly, gesture, things of that nature, all of what we call paralinguistic, not linguistic communications are happening nonverbally all the time. And so when you think about it, everything you do is an expression of the self. How you wear your hair, what clothes you wear, the car you drive, the food you make, the food you like, the movies you like, all of it is an expression of that. And, more to the body point, our nonverbal cues communicate more than our spoken words ever could. So even the musical tone of our voice, sometimes couples will be in arguments or they'll say things like, well, it wasn't what you said, but it's how you say it. So the tone of your voice, or you're always using that tone, and the other person will say, well, what tone are you talking about? And they'll say, well, that tone. And so that tone is so highly communicative into our own nervous systems that even though you might be saying one thing, the meaning is coming through in the tone. Likewise, in the facial expression. We've all seen people that put on a fake smile. They're like, I'm fine, right? So they're stretching the muscles of the mouth, indicating they're fine. But really, you don't see the eyes lighting up as fine. You don't see the whole face relaxed in a way that's fine. What you see... Excuse me. I didn't expect that. What you see is an expression that's coming forward that is incongruent with how the person says they are. So Emily writes, I feel like we do puff ourselves up, but it shows that we care about presenting ourselves well to this person. And I think that's true. I think there's something about bringing, to use an old phrase, sort of your Sunday best to the person that you're meeting. If we didn't show our best selves first, it's almost like saying they aren't even worth that effort. And I think, and thank you for the, the sneeze salutation. Yes, I think it's true. If you're sort of not that interested in the date, you might just, not really, take a shower or wash your hair or do anything special. You just kind of show up because you're not that excited or interested. But when you're really interested, there is an arousal state in the body. There is a dopamine, high adrenaline state that motivates us to move into areas we might not typically motivate into. So we might put in extra effort to, take a shower, wash your hair, iron clothing, buy something new to wear, all of these things that are signals of interest. So I agree, there's nothing wrong with that kind of interest. It does signal a desire to go forward. And even in that interest, I think the Shakespeare quote is pointing to that there's still something essential that we hold back. And I would say what we hold back is a deep, deep kernel of vulnerability, which I'll talk to as we go along here. A picture is truly worth 1,000 words, and we perpetually express a picture of our inner lives, known and unknown. So again, our lives are an outpicturing of who we are by way of all of the colorful things and choices and even people we have around us. We could say the type of pet we have and the type of friends we have are expressions of who we are too. Somebody asked, how would the nonverbals change, if at all, after that courtship stage? Well, I think nonverbals are always at play, always. And so you cannot lie. You might think you're lying, but the truth is you're in a body-to-body communication with somebody, a brain-to-brain communication on a deeply unconscious level. So even when you think you're being cagey, the truth is we pick up these nonverbal cues all the time. Somebody will say to you, you seem off. And you'll say, no, I'm fine, as opposed to being honest and saying, well, I'm a little bit sad, or I was ambivalent about this date. I wasn't sure if I should come on it or not. I really like you, but I'm concerned about this. And that validates the other person's reality when you're honest about what they're feeling about you and you're truthful about what that is. Now, this can get more complicated because sometimes we don't really know the truth of how we're feeling, but we're communicating it to another and they pick it up, but we're not able to see or feel it. And that's when communication can break down and or intimacy can get deeper. But that again goes back to being vulnerable and saying, wow, you might know more about my own personal truth right now than I know. Kevin says, aren't sex addicts and others leading a double life successful at hiding their inner reality for a time? I would say they're successful at hiding their extracurricular activities if they're in a relationship, and they're successful at holding back an essential part of who they are, and their partners often feel like maybe they're a little bit superficial, or they'll make excuse and saying, well, I know he or she's been very busy, or I know he's been stressed out for a long time. So the partner gets into this resonant dance with the addict in a way that they don't even know they're getting into it, because what they'll say later is that, wow, this person was a supremely good liar. I had no idea it was going on. And the truth is, consciously they didn't know it was going on, but I would wager that unconsciously and on a bodily-based level, there was some misfiring, some sense that something was not quite right. But it didn't look egregious. It didn't look like, large amounts of money coming out of a bank account, or the person was raging or difficult all the time. It was just kind of a gut feeling that the partner will often give the addict the benefit of the doubt about. And that's what we do in love relationships. If you come home at the end of the day and you're short, your partner will fill in the blanks by saying, oh, it must have been a long day, or it was a hard day. They don't think, oh, he must be cheating on me every single day. So that's, again, where this can get more tricky and subtle, these nonverbal expressions. So as I've been saying, there's really no way not to express our inner reality. I think we are expressing that all the time with each other, and part of what happens is that we all sort of verbally communicate so rapidly that we don't slow things down enough to actually trust and get a read on the other person. So we might think, oh, that seems a little bit off, but that person's talking, you're talking, and it goes away. And verbally we will fill in the blanks, or intellectually we'll fill in the blanks, even though we don't really know what the truth is. The ways we express are as significant as the words we express. So keep that in mind, when you are in relationship with another person, and see, before you say something, maybe check in with yourself and say, what am I noticing in my body right now? What am I really feeling in the presence of the other? And sometimes not talking and sharing eye contact, or breathing together, or just having a laugh together is enough to be in this, what I'm calling this resonant space, a space where two people's timing starts to line up. Because if you make eye contact with a partner and they can't meet you, oftentimes there's shame there, or there's something going on with them, and that will tell you more than any words tell you about what the truth of the situation is. So I would encourage you to rely more on nonverbal communication and less on these verbal loops and arguments that we can get into with each other. Chris says, I'm in a toxic, broken relationship. My partner lives across the country, and we communicate verbally, phone, text, email, and it seems impossible to grow or gain any intimacy in expression. She's not evolving in recovery, or better said, not accepting. Should I express more by written notes, mail, or cards? Well, I think the problem here is the lack of perhaps, real eye contact with each other, because there's only so much you can do through phone and text and emails. Being in a long-distance relationship is profoundly difficult, and even under the best of circumstances, hard to make work over time. So sure, I don't know how written notes and mail would be different than email, because both of those are written forms. It seems to me you need to ask yourself why you stay in what you call a toxic, broken relationship. Why stay in something like that? What is it actually doing for you? What does it give to you? If it's as bad as you're writing, then what it's doing is just a distraction. It's just filling in a space so you don't have to be in that space of loss, pain, loneliness, and getting clearer about who you are and what you want. So I would suggest, Chris, that you look more closely at why you stay in this communication versus how you can communicate in a different way, because you're limited when you're not in the presence of each other. And when we're in the presence of each other, we feel each other, and that makes the difference. I feel you feeling me, and you feel me feeling you, and so it doesn't matter sometimes what we're talking about. It's just content about what you had for lunch and where I'm going after this. But the resonant space is the eye contact, what you see when you see your partner looking at you, what you notice with their gesture. Is she twirling her hair while she talks to you, which is a sign of affection and flirtation? Are arms crossed, uncrossed? Is there a closeness? What is the overall communication that's nonverbal taking place that tells you how your partner feels about you versus endless, verbiage? Verbal expression always represents a decision about what we choose to bring into public view, and can be quite a not just a distraction but a defense. And I've watched couples get into these verbal jousting conversations with each other where they try to one-up each other, or it becomes this intellectual exercise in who can figure the other person out. But all of it is smoke and mirrors for not becoming more vulnerable, for not just talking about the impact that you have on me, how that makes me feel, whether it's in love with you or joy-filled or scared or insecure or unsure. And that is a different language. That's the language of the body, of the heart, of our most primitive needs, and most essential emotional dependency needs. So language can be fun, certainly. There's nothing like a good, delicious conversation where we get to intellectually go all over the place with each other. But I want to suggest that you be mindful about how much language gets used as a way to start to create separation or becomes antithetical to intimacy. There are those who barely speak and are more quiet. Sometimes we call people like that introverts. And when those people speak, oftentimes their words can carry more weight since they're not over-explaining themselves. There's that saying that still waters run deep. Sometimes people who use fewer words, more of an economy of words, communicate more specifically what they want and need. And the flip side of that can be that people who don't speak very much don't have a high capacity for introspection or knowing themselves, or can't really communicate what they actually do need. So play around with that notion too if you're someone who doesn't talk that much, or if you're somebody who avoids conversations because you're afraid that it actually reveals too much about you. So which are you? And with yourself all the time, so you fully understand the meaning of your words, but those who become your audience, your listeners, may hear only little snippets of your constant inner conversation. So notice that also when you're with yourself. What's going on in your head when you're in a conversation with somebody else? Are you already planning what you're going to say? Are you really listening? Are you picking and choosing and controlling what comes out of your mouth? Or are you somebody who just doesn't censor or monitor anything, which is the other extreme? So we're looking here, as always, for moderation. What do you really think? How are you actually going to talk about it? What do you say? And are you mindful about, the words that you use so that you are kind and compassionate, but also getting your desired thoughts across to the other? Emily says, I feel many times that I don't effectively communicate or am misunderstood. I've taken to letting others just think what they want of what I say and hope the rest gets picked up by my actions. Could this cause a problem? And this business of feeling misunderstood, I think, is huge for most people. So often, we have the experience of, I'll just tell you that sometimes I have this whole dialogue in my head where I'm taking into account multiple things in relation to the context of the person I'm with. But then I'll say something that doesn't include that whole context, and that person can feel misunderstood or unseen. And then I feel terrible because I'd already thought of all those things, that it was all just in my head. I didn't say all of it. So this matter of being understood requires a lot of back and forth, a lot of grappling, and that often happens verbally and with conversation. But I think what you're pointing to is that actions speak louder than words. You might think, oh, gosh, Alex is irresponsible because I asked her to do that thing and she didn't do it, and I flaked or I forgot about it. But if I plead with you to believe me or trust me or give me more responsibility, and you do that and I keep flaking, then you're never going to believe me or trust me. But if I don't plead with you and I'm given a second chance and I show up on time and I do what I say I'm going to do, those actions speak so much more about my own self-respect, my respect for your time and energy, and that repairs things quicker than anything. So I think you have to be judicious about when you let other people think whatever they're going to think, and then you just show up and let your actions change their behavior or their perceptions of you versus trying to argue somebody out of their perceptions of you. The latter can sometimes be a no-win situation. Melissa writes, my husband of 34 years and I are trying to work out our relationship. He says, I never use terms towards him like honey, baby, sweetie. This has never felt comfortable to me. I'm one to demonstrate my love and care with actions, cooking a meal that they like, getting them a present I know they really want. He's making this a must in our relationship. I feel like he's not allowing me to be myself. So I've always said that cooking is an act of love because it takes a lot of work to prepare, make, clean up, put away. So I understand that your demonstration of love is important. But these terms of endearment also resonate in our brains and in our bodies in a way that food does not. So this is like the person who says, I never tell my spouse I love them. They should just know because I do all these loving things. But that's like saying you never pay anybody a compliment by saying, wow, you look really nice today, or I like your haircut, or that shirt looks really great on you. Human beings need validation, and we shouldn't be so reliant on others for validation that we can't function, but we need feedback from one another to know that we're doing it okay, or we're on the right mark, or that we're appreciated by our partners. So I would bet that these terms of endearment are bumping up against your own shame and your own feelings of not being lovable, and there's a lack of vulnerability there on your part that I would encourage you to take a look at. Now, obviously, I don't know this, for certain because I don't know you, and I'm speaking in generalities, but I think this is the same mechanism that other people struggle with when it comes to taking a compliment. So there are people that say, I get so uncomfortable when somebody compliments me, and that's because the compliment bumps up against their shame. And their challenge is to simply make eye contact, take a deep breath, and say thank you, and let them take in the compliment to see what that feels like. In this case, your husband's asking you to give a compliment by way of a term of endearment. And what's happening for you that you are withholding that? I would guess that you go into shame about saying a word like that because it makes you feel awkward or creepy, or you can't somehow hold it in your own sexuality in a certain way. So I would recommend that you talk to a therapist about this and see if you can get to the bottom of it. My guess is it's not that deep-seated, and I think you should find a word that resonates for you, that feels right for you. Oftentimes, couples have these nonverbal expressions with one another, a shorthand, a secret language that nobody else in the world has. And oftentimes that language is incredibly goofy or silly, or the terms of endearment come from an experience they had together when they were, first met, or something funny happened, and it just kind of sticks, and nobody else uses that word or that phrase. And if anybody else heard it, they would think it was, goofy or silly, but it has a history, it has a meaning, it's embedded in the coupleship and in the relationship. And so it's a way to express love and a knowing, a deep knowing of each other that nobody else knows about. So I would like to see you challenge yourself on this, Melissa, and see what this really is about for you. Okay. So this is about shared language. The truth that is shared, meaningful language, is based on trust that is built. And I believe this shared language, like trust, is built one block at a time over time in relationships. On the flip side of what I'm talking about, there are people who are very good at being seductive and creating what I call the snow job, where you meet them and right off the bat they're sweetie, honey, this and that, and you think, wow, that's like a little bit too much too fast. I don't even know you, and you're calling me that and you're putting your hand on my shoulder. That can be a little bit of a red flag also, because there's a superficiality to that kind of intimacy. So the kind of intimacy and shared language we're talking about is something that's built, and it's built on context, and it's built over time with a trusted other. When it comes to relational expression, which is really what I'm talking about here, the more you nurture an accurate mutual understanding of verbal expression with others, the more you develop a special bond of comprehension that lets you finish each other's sentences and even hear nonverbal cues. So this comes with people being in relationship for a long time. Sometimes you don't even have to say much of anything. You're just pointing to a shared experience or a shared knowing, and the other already knows what you're going to say. Because you both somewhere along the line made a contract that you agreed on those things together. It might have been what you had in common about, foods or politics or child rearing or any number of other things where you just sort of get it and you don't have to do anything about that. You do something for each other. It's sort of like a relay where one person needs something done and they can't complete the whole task, so they do part of it, and you know that means you're going to pick up the second half of it, and it goes without saying. So those hearing of nonverbal cues is a high level of attunement to those around us who we love and care about. And it can be with, an elder parent or a child. It doesn't just have to be with a lover. The gift of that cultivated mutual understanding is that you can really see who you and others are and really understand what you're creating in your shared lives. So, of course, this again is about building intimacy, but these moments of nonverbal expressions can also be, it's like the mother who has the look. Like most of us grew up with a parent or a grandparent who had the look, and we didn't have to know, they didn't have to say a word, and we knew exactly what the look meant. That's a strong nonverbal communication. It gets deeply encoded in the autonomic nervous system. It registers as fear the moment you see it as a kid, and you know that you're not going to put your hand in that candy dish or cross whatever line that is, because something not pleasant is going to happen once the look has been executed. So these nonverbal expressions can come in many, many forms. But as we continue to understand each other more deeply and we really see who the other person is, then we create a deeper intimacy with each other. And I think this is a place also where couples can get into trouble when they start falling out of attraction for each other, and therefore they think they're falling out of love with each other, because we get so busy attending to the superficiality of the person, sort of their quirks and the way they move and the way they maybe do certain things that you find annoying over time. And rather than looking through all of that and deeper into the eyes of the soul of that human being, that person that you always loved deeply, that you trusted, that you felt was your best friend, and connecting with them on a sexual level, an emotional level, a deeply bodily-based level, where sexuality is reignited, we tend to stay in the superficial, and then what happens is couples start to pick on each other. It's like, well, I don't like this, or the way you dress, or you were so annoying yesterday, or I don't like the way you talked to my mother, or I didn't like the way you said this to Bob at the party the other night. I mean, it just goes on and on until we talk ourselves out of the trust and the love and the deep intimacy we've built, assuming there's been no betrayal to break that, and we miss the deep humanity of that person. And oddly, what happens is if that person starts to feel like they don't want to be in the relationship anymore, or they have cheated, then all of a sudden we get threatened and feel like, oh my God, I'm about to lose the best thing that ever happened to me. So we want what we can't have. So instead of tossing away what we want, the challenge is to look more deeply at what we have and want what we have, because we're looking at intimacy and eroticism that's coming from our partners. Somebody writes, how would you say conditioning impinges upon how we express ourselves and what we hear from others' expressions? Well, I think conditioning is a lot, but this conditioning is really an unconscious conditioning. Our mother's voices, traumas, things of that nature get laid down and they're imprinted in the deeper parts of our brain, so much so that you can hear a shrill voice that replicates, let's say, a shrill mother when you were a child, that goes right into the auditory canal, deep into the brain, and we immediately register danger or unpleasantness. And that is a form of conditioning that will impinge on whether or not I'll talk back to that person or I'll engage in conversation with them because I'm already reading danger or that this person isn't safe. But the truth is it's a case of mistaken identity because that person isn't my mother, hypothetically, and I have to use my higher cognition to remind myself that, oh, that's not my mother or the person that was shrill and abusive to me. Maybe it was a third grade teacher. And I really am interested in getting to know this person, so I'm going to do my best to start to recondition myself. Notice when I get, excuse me, aroused in my system and try and calm myself down so I can stay relational with this person. How does conditioning show up in our expressions? Well, I think when we are, somebody told me recently that they have a young child who's starting to yell because he's been yelling for so long, and he's working on anger and his yelling, and he's starting to try and parent from a nonviolent communication place, and it's already changing the way his 6-year-old is communicating and behaving. Now, he's caught this pattern early enough, but if he hadn't, that 6-year-old would be a 16-year-old, and that child would yell the way that he grew up being yelled at because the system gets conditioned in that way. So that's how it shows up in our expressions. So if you hear yourself doing things that were done to you, you have an opportunity to change those things by being mindful, by seeking help, by doing whatever you need to do to pay attention to what activates those expressions so you can intervene on yourself, really. And then this person writes about, well, what about transference or projection? The truth is we are projecting onto others all the time. All the time. We take what we know, and so we think we already know what something is. If I see a chocolate ice cream cone, I'm going to project all sorts of things onto it. And I'm routinely disappointed because I'll just say that chocolate is my favorite ice cream flavor. And there are a million types of chocolate. And if I assume it's going to be the thing that I'm salivating for and craving in that moment, I'm going to be set up for disappointment. And I won't actually get to enjoy that particular iteration of chocolate ice cream. And we do this all the time. So dropping expectations, being aware of what's coming towards us, getting curious about it, and saying, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to be open and find out what's true for me is the most conscious thing that we can do. So today, why don't you think about practicing aligning your verbal and nonverbal expressions privately. Notice how you're feeling when you're alone today. And if you're feeling crummy, imagine somebody saying, how are you today? And you say, I'm feeling crummy, instead of saying fine. Fine is the because in a way, we all have this notion that we don't want to overburden the person who's asking how we are. And so when somebody asks me how I am, depending on my relationship with them, I'll say, well, do you want the long answer or the short answer? Or I'll tell them, and I'll say, well, you asked how I was, so here it comes. So see if you can be congruent with yourself for starters, or if you lie to yourself. Check in with your body. Notice if you're feeling any tenseness or tightness in your chest, your solar plexus, your gut, your pelvic area, and ask yourself what that feeling really is and verbalize it to yourself. And that will allow you to practice that in person with other people. Take time to recall an emotionally charged event in your life and narrate what happened while observing the feelings that you're feeling and the feelings as they happened. So often we will tell a story about, anything from an atrocity to something just bad that happened, and we'll be telling the story so fast, the verbal is moving so rapidly that we're steamrolling over any emotions that are arising from the body. Because if we didn't do that, we'd likely start crying, and then we feel bad and we start apologizing to people around us that we're crying, when crying tears are sometimes the most appropriate thing to be doing in that moment. So if I told you that, my pet was ill and I just am rambling along about the diagnosis, that's a way for me to stay out of my feelings. But if I slow it down and I tell you and you're really interested and you're listening, I'm likely going to start crying because I'm feeling so sad or scared about losing this beloved animal. And if I'm choosing to tell you as a good friend or a lover, then I want to feel safe and I want to feel heard and I want to feel that you actually have empathy for what I'm expressing to you. And that creates a deep intimacy and a deep caring for one another. What are the 3 positive statements that express the way you feel about each of your significant relationships when you think about them? Think about the people that, are closest to you right now, and what are the statements that express the way that you feel about them, and do you tell them that you love them, that you feel a great sense of joy or play when you're around them, that you value them? Because so often we don't say these things to each other, and this goes back to Melissa's point or her husband's point about wanting to know, like, who is he to her? What does he mean to her? I tell my people around me that I'm closest to that I love them every day. Or I'll recall, like with my nephew recently, who's going off to college in a few weeks. Recently, I recalled with him the funniest moment I can remember with him, and we even, we chuckle about it now, but there's a hilarity that happened in that incident that neither one of us will ever forget. And just, all I have to say is one word from here on out for the rest of our lives. And that will be a shorthand that he and I know that will have us remembering this, sort of wacky and kind of dumb experience, actually. But it was only the 2 of us, and it was so funny in the moment that we'll remember that. And so he makes me laugh. So let those people know how you feel and the exact way that you feel it in that moment. Give it to them in an unvarnished way. Make yourself vulnerable, because it's in that vulnerability that we learn to love and trust deeply. So any other thoughts or questions here today about self-expression?
We have a non-expressing crowd at that.
We have a big crowd, too.
Yeah, it's been great.
So really, we have 28 people on the line, and no one has anything to say about self-expression. I don't believe you.
Alex, how can we express our most vulnerable self? And are there appropriate ways to do so, and are there ever times when that's inappropriate?
Well, I think we have to obviously be careful about whose presence we're in. You don't want to express your most vulnerable self with someone who's going to hurt you. We all know who's safe in our lives, who's not safe. Sometimes the not safe people that we keep around are not voluntary. They're family members. So if you have a grouchy old aunt and you know that she's always pessimistic or negative, you don't want to sit down with her and tell her about this new artistic endeavor you're embarking on, because she's probably going to, bum you out. So don't do it. With someone like that, you just kind of keep to news, sports, and weather. But if you have a trusted friend or you have a lover or a partner, you can start becoming vulnerable simply in the ways that I've been talking about by just expressing how you're feeling in that moment. When you come home today and your partner says, "How was your day?" don't give them the fine answer. Say, "Can we take 5 minutes and check in with each other? I'd like to tell you how my day was." And you can say, let's say it was stressful. You can say it was really stressful, and I started to have this fantasy that I wish I couldn't work anymore. I wish I could be taken care of. I wish we were independently wealthy enough that you would take care of me, or that I could stay home and I could pursue my, whatever you want to pursue, your art. And I'm afraid to tell you this because I think that you're going to think that I don't want to work anymore, or that the burden's all on you, or that I'm not grateful for what we do have. But I just have to tell you, today I was feeling really weary and unloved, and like I just didn't matter to anybody in the world. And, I appreciate that you can hear this. And if you're on the receiving end of that, you want to make sure that you don't start to get defensive or hostile or shaming about that. Your best response would be, wow, I can totally understand why you would be feeling so exhausted or weary, knowing how much you're not crazy about your job. And sorry, I can't support us both, but what I can do is give you a hug right now, or rub your feet, or hey, let's change our clothes and go for a walk around the block, or maybe go skip around the block, or do something to change the channel. And just remember that at least we have each other. And that's the simplest kind of vulnerability there is. So I do have some questions here now. Natalie says, what I experience often when I tell a story, the other person will start telling me their experience of the same thing. Is this a reach for connection or something else? I think that can often be a desire to relate to something. So if I said to you, oh my God, I found this white blouse and it was really cool and I loved it, and you might say, oh, I saw a white blouse also, and the one I saw was made out of this fabric and it looked like that. I think that's just your desire to connect with me on something common. Or that can be a one-upsmanship, that somebody's feeling threatened by the other person, so they have to feel like they're in on it too. So it really depends on the person. But if it's with a person who's close enough, you can start by saying, I want to tell you about something that happens, and I would really appreciate it if you could just listen. And then when I'm finished, we can kind of share our experiences. Are you okay with that? But I have to say I'm guilty of doing that with my husband. He'll want to tell me something, and I want to relate to it, but in the relating to it, he loses his train of thought, and so it becomes aggravating to him. So I've learned to sort of hold my thoughts and really listen more carefully to him, and what I found is the thing that I was going to relate to was probably not that important anyway. It's not like I can't tell him about it another time. So these are nuanced, and it depends on who you're in conversation with. Samantha says, you mentioned earlier about how at times people will use excessive intellect during an argument or during conflict to one-up each other. Both my partner and I are psychologists, and I feel he often does this during a conflict. How do we work on this? Well, I think, first of all, it's very, very difficult to not therapize each other and to put that hat aside and to bring your humanity into the relationship. And I had to learn this many, many years ago with my husband, who's not a therapist, who told me to stop being a therapist. And that was, tough to hear. And I've seen this with lawyers also. They come home and they start lawyering each other, and it doesn't go anywhere. So you've got to put all that down and make an agreement that you're actually going to actively listen to each other. Because I think the act of slowing down and even using some basic imago techniques of just, let me repeat back to you what you just said. This is what I heard you say. Is that accurate? Yes, that's accurate. And then you continue, and then, you can say, I really appreciate that I feel heard right now. Because the one-upsmanship becomes a defensive style of communication, and that's a really great place to hide out and become invulnerable. And therapists can hide out behind, their psychological savvy and their intellect because it's very difficult to be in the hot seat. We want our clients to be in the hot seat, but we don't want to be in it. And so if you're going to be in a love relationship, you need to bring your humanity and not your intellect forward. Sarah says, when you spoke of projection, how do you express anger, frustration to a significant other when there is a concern about the other's projection that comes up in defensiveness and even taking what was said in a totally different vein? Okay, so I'm going to try to understand this better. How do you express anger to another person when your fear is that the other person's projection is going to be defensive and they're going to take what you say in a totally different way. Oh, well, that's sort of more of the same thing. If I'm telling you that I'm angry at you, and you get hostile and defensive, there's a narcissism in that, meaning it's self-centered because you don't really want to hear what I'm angry about. You want to now make it that I'm always talking to you about this thing, or I'm never this or that, or I'm just an angry person. And so that's really, a form of blocking communication. So again, this is about mutual communication and saying, I just want to tell you right now, Sarah, I'm super angry at you. I don't like that you left the sponge on the counter again this morning when I've asked you, I don't know how many times to not do that. So can we talk about that? Without you starting to tell me that, I'm treating you the way that your mother treats you, or, some sort of amateur psychology here. Can we just talk about that? And you've got to be able to say yes and not be defensive and not paint me as being defensive, and let me tell you why this sponge situation is so aggravating to me. And if I start to talk about that it makes me feel disrespected, or that I don't matter to you, or that I'm always going to pick up after you and that you don't have my back, then you're starting to really hear my humanity, not just construct me as, a witch or someone who's neurotic about a sponge. And sorry to pick on you, Sarah. I'm not mad at you. So these conversations, it is about the sponge. Okay. Well, here's the thing with women, and I know this is really a gender bias and stereotype, but oftentimes women feel like we feel like we're not respected when things in the kitchen don't get tended to in the ways that we ask for. And sometimes I think we have to pick and choose our battles and say, well, okay, maybe he doesn't put a dish away, I do, but this is my standard of cleanliness, it's not his or hers. And so I've asked, it's not working and getting done, I can't expect that person to adhere to my standards, so I'm just going to do it. And likewise, there might be things he or she does that I don't really care that much about, but they really like done a certain way, so they're going to do that. And that's about being collaborative in a relationship. So we have to look at kind of what our part is in, the situation, even when it's a sponge. All right. Well, thank you for that.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Yes?
Yes, I'm here. My question is about trust. My husband had 2 different affairs, very short-lived, but I'm trying to get through that now, and I've been in counseling, I'm doing some group therapy, and it's just now been about a year since the second one. And I feel that he is really pushing me to, get over it, get on with rebuilding our relationship and focusing on that. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really struggling with that.
Well, understandably, because you can't force forgiveness. And also, I would ask him what he's done to regain your trust. What has he done to make the relationship safe, to show you that you're special, that he really wants to be with you, that he loves you? How has he made a living amends for breaching, the trust and the very foundation of the relationship? What kind of work is he doing to prove to you that you should take him back? The onus is on him. He's the one who breached the trust in the relationship, not you. And you should not leapfrog your process of forgiveness, because that becomes an act of violence against yourself. So the 2 of you should be in couples therapy with a good couples therapist that will help him see that he has a lot to do with how quickly or slowly you move towards forgiving. And forgiveness is a long process, and you won't ever forget that he did this not once but twice. So I hope he's looking very closely at why he keeps doing this to you. There's a book called After the Affair, which I don't know if you've read or not, but I highly recommend it. It's by Janice Spring Abrams, or Abrams Spring. And it's a really important book for you to take a look at. And of course, there are other books on betrayal as well. Okay, so our time is up today. As usual, it's been a fun and lively conversation. I hope you all go out and express yourself in a multitude of beautiful rainbow-like ways today. And I look forward to talking to you all in September. All right, have a good rest of the summer and take good care. Bye.